What's going on, my boys? It's Nick, coming at you today for the very first time on the channel with an Ursarctic deck profile. Now, a lot of you may be familiar with this deck, and for those of you who are, may have also heard that this deck, well, isn't very good. However, after this profile, I'm going to try and change your opinion about that. Ursarctic is actually a deck that I wanted to put together because, number one, I like the artwork. I think it's absolutely cool. And number two, I just like the lore behind the deck, being based off of the Ursa Major constellation and Ursa Minor, and Ursa being the Latin word for bear. Konami, it's all just one big pun, apparently. But I wanted to bring this deck to the channel, and it's something that I know a lot of content creators tend to not really cover, again, because a lot of people think that this deck just isn't very good because of its inherent playstyle. Now, that may be true, and obviously that's subject to opinion. However, I personally believe, with the amount of time that I spent on this particular list, that it functions quite well. And to be honest, if you're looking for a budget deck, obviously I'm not saying that this is going to sweep a YCS or take over a regional, but if you're looking for a fun budget deck to play, especially post-Hypernova format when Kashtira is going to be running pretty rampant, this deck hard counters most Xyz strategies, for those of you unaware. So I just think it was pretty cool, and I wanted to bring it to you guys today on the channel for the very first time. So with that being said, I'm not going to make this intro too long. My name is Nick. You guys already know how we do it here on the channel. We do live duel videos, deck profiles, deck discussions. If those are things that you're interested in, then I highly encourage you to hit that subscribe button. If you're watching this right now and made it this far and haven't subscribed yet, then there might be something wrong with you, because I don't understand why you wouldn't subscribe when I keep bringing you guys really cool and unique content like this. Again, like the video and comment down below on what you think of this deck. But with that being said, we are going to hop right into the profile, and like we do here on the channel, we're starting with the monster lineup. So we are starting things off with triple copies of Ursarctic McPolar. Now, every single Ursarctic main deck monster has the same summoning requirement, so I'm not going to go over it every single time. I'm only going to say it once and just apply that same summoning condition to the rest of the main deck monsters that are Ursarctic in name. And that summoning requirement is, during the main phase, quick effect, you contribute one other level 7 or higher monster from your hand as cost to then special summon this card from your hand. Now, every single main deck Ursarctic, whether they're level 7 non-tuner or the level 8 tuners, have that same summoning requirement regardless of which one it is. So because of that, the deck often tends to become pretty neggy in nature because you're constantly taking a -1 just to put your bodies on field, which most decks don't have that problem. With that being said, though, Ursarctic McPolar, specifically, besides him being a level 7 water attribute beast type monster, when he is special summoned, you can add an Ursarctic monster from the deck to your hand, except a copy of himself. Now, one more thing that I want to bring up is that when you use the Ursarctic effects from hand, you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn except monsters with a level. So this deck really hates on like any card that doesn't have levels, in which case being Lynx and Xyz monsters as of right now. So pretty much the moment you activate any of their effects, you're locked into only summoning monsters that have levels. But anyway, getting back to McPolar specifically, I decided to max out on this card, not only because it's a Rhoda for the theme, allowing you to search for the other Ursarctics that you may be missing, but because of the inherent nature of this deck, constantly making you go -1 to put bodies on board, this card in particular is a card that helps you recoup some of that loss, because it immediately adds a card from deck to your hand, kind of replenishing the minus you took to put McPolar on field in the first place. And then one more thing that I also want to bring up before moving on is that all of the Ursarctic monsters, they don't have to be special summoned by their own by their effects to trigger their effects on field. As long as they're special summoned by any means, they can get whatever effects that they have. So that's something else that I want to preface before diving any further. But of course, like I said, we start off with 3 McPolar, very crucial to the deck, because like I said, he helps recoup some of the loss. And the same thing can be said for Ursarctic McTanis, which we are on 3 copies of here. Now McTanis, again, same summoning requirement as McPolar. When this card is special summoned, you can target an Ursarctic monster in your graveyard except himself and add it to hand. So we decided to max out on McPolar and McTanis for the simple fact that, well, they simply add a card back to your hand to help you regain some of the value lost from putting them on board in the first place. So I think those cards are absolutely mandatory, should be played at 3 in any Ursarctic list. I don't understand why people tend to only play like 1 to 2 McTanis. like, you're going to be dumping so many cards to the graveyard, but getting these things on field, that Mectanus is usually almost always going to have a card to add back. So why wouldn't you just want a free card back for your trouble for getting these on field? So triple copies of Mectanus, obviously. And then for the last level 7 minor bear, as we call them, is 1 copy of Billis. Now, when this card is special summoned, you can special summon 1 Ursarctic monster from your hand, except a copy of himself. Now, you might be asking yourself, why are we only playing 1 copy of this? Well, this is actually the only Ursarctic monster that doesn't actually get you value back once it's special summoned. Unlike Polar and Mectanus, who let you add cards either from deck or grave to hand to help you regain some of the, recoup the loss you took to summon them, this card doesn't do that. This card is really only good if you already have pre-existing setup and have the right cards in hand. Outside of that, I don't really think this card is that beneficial because you don't go plus when you activate this card. Like, it doesn't actually give you anything back. Yes, it's a way to special, so it almost functions like an extender of sorts. However, it's not really a card you usually want to open with because it is very contingent on how the rest of your hand looks. And as a result, we just play the one of and kind of search it when we need it, once we have the setup that we need. So just 1 copy of Billis in this case, and that's going to round up the minor bears, as we call them. Basically the beast type bears that are level 7s and that are non-tuners. Those bears are the more defensive ones. Again, you can special summon them on either player's main phase, which does make them pretty unique. But now we're going to be getting into the major bears, or the ones that actually have a little bit more of a proactive effect. So we're starting things off with triple copies of Ursarctic Megatanus. Now this is a level 8 Beast Warrior Tuner Effect Monster. 2400 attack, has the exact same summoning requirement as Polar, Mectanus, and Billis. And now when this card is special summoned, while you control another Ursarctic monster, keep that in mind, all of the major bears, in order for them to trigger their on-field effects, require you to already control an Ursarctic monster. When this card is special summoned, while you control an Ursarctic monster, you can target a face-up monster your opponent controls as cost, change it to face-down defense position. So this card is effectively a Book of Moon, albeit you do have to jump through a bit of hoops, but to be quite honest, it's not very difficult to establish these guys and get their effects online once you kind of see how the deck actually plays. So we max out on Megatanus because he is a disruption, technically, that you can just throw out from your hand during your opponent's turn when they least expect it, keeping them off of like synchro plays or link plays, perhaps even Xyz plays. Just having an in-archetype Book of Moon is some pretty good utility overall. So we max out on the triple copies of the Megatanus. Then moving on, we play triple copies of Mega Polar in this particular list. Now, Mega Polar, again, same summoning requirement as the rest of the bears. When this card is special summoned while you control an Ursarctic monster, you can target 1 spell trap card your opponent controls, destroy it. So this is effectively a Mystical Space Typhoon on legs, on a 2500 body, which is pretty cool. Again, it does require a bit of setup, but having an in-archetype MST it's pretty nice since you can search this whenever and be able to pop back row on either player's turn, which is pretty cool. And then moving on to the last major bear we play is 2 copies of Ursarctic Billis. This, when it is special summoned while you control another Ursarctic monster, you can target a card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it. Now, it's pretty much DD Crow. It's also the biggest bear we have in the main deck at 2800. So you would think that we would be maxing out on this at 3. However, despite this card being a quote-unquote DD Crow-like card, it actually isn't like DD Crow because it's a little slow. You have to understand that the effect to summon itself is a quick effect, which is great, but the effect that triggers when it hits the field is a trigger effect, which is only a spell speed 1 effect, meaning that if a current chain is resolving, that chain has to resolve until you can activate this effect on a new chain. So what I mean by that is if the opponent goes Monster Reborn, targets a monster, you chain Billis. Billis will be chainlink 2 to special, but then chainlink 1 will resolve, Monster Reborn will resolve, summoning that monster. Then once that occurs, Billis can target something in their grave and banish it on a brand new chain. So if you're trying to snipe their target with Reborn, you actually can't, just because of the nature of how this card works. And obviously all the Mega Bears are like that. Same thing with Mega Polar and Megatanus, but it's just something I wanted to bring up. So because it's not really like a DD Crow, and it's a little bit slower, I only just run this guy at 2 for those reasons. And that rounds out our overall bear package. Now, if you notice something funny, Ursarctic does not play a normal summon, because all the bears obviously can be special summoned from hand by attributing other level 7 or higher monsters. One thing that I will say is, at least, as much as Konami neutered this deck with restrictions, at least Konami allowed you to tribute any level 7 or higher monster. It doesn't have to be an Ursarctic, so you can get a little bit creative with how you want to go about summoning these guys, which I think is cool. But again, the deck doesn't have a normal summon, so I've seen other profiles where they play cards like, Deep Sea Diva and go into like Neptibus or Atlantean different plays. I've also seen people use Diva to summon the like Guitar Grenards thing. It's like a level 3 Sea Serpent. And obviously, like, Diva's cool. But the problem that I have with the Diva engine is that the targets you would run for Diva are not that great to draw for the most part. And if you do draw them, Diva can't summon them from hand. Diva can only special them from deck. So then it becomes a matter of, well, how many do I play? Like, should I bump them up to 2? And it sucks because it's like, if you bump it up to 2 just to have on a deck in the event you draw one, you don't really want to be drawing them in the first place. So like, it gives you like a lot of conundrums and like really awkward hands, I felt, especially with the Neptibus line, because then you got to play like all the Atlantean stuff, like Dragoons and like Poseidra, for example, and it just like you started filling the deck with a bunch of like dead cards pretty much, and I wasn't too happy with that. So what I did find was that the righty driver and lefty driver line are actually very strong in this particular list, for the simple fact that righty driver on his own is pretty much a 1-card line into Polari, which I think is great. Again, righty driver, when he's normal summoned, he allows you to special summon a lefty driver from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So I really like that a lot, because he gives you that utility in the event that you do draw the target that what you intended to summon off righty. It's still not dead, as if you had Diva instead, if you drew the Diva target, Diva doesn't do anything. So I like that a lot. Plus, not to mention, if you do draw the lefty driver can banish itself, except the turn it was sent to grave. It can banish itself from the graveyard to search for a righty driver from deck to hand. So the engine is pretty much self-sufficient, and it doesn't occupy a lot of space in the deck, which I like. Because that was another issue too. Like, if you play the Diva line, you need like 3 Divas, and then you have like at least like 4 to 5 different targets if you're playing like the Atlantean package, because you need like the Neptibus, you need Dragoons, you need Poseidra. And then if you're playing like the Guitar Gurnards, like, you could just run Diva in that, but then drawing that Guitar Gurnards card, I forget the name, but drawing that card, it's a level 3 Sea Serpent, that can like double its level when special summoned. If you play that card doesn't do anything if you hard draw it. Where at least if you draw the lefty driver, you can go lefty in one of the Mega Bears and make a level 10 synchro. And then next turn, banish the lefty to search righty, and then you get access into your whole line. So I really like the righty and lefty driver package in this list. It's very condensed, and it gets straight to the point. Because obviously righty and lefty by themselves get you into Ursarctic Polari. Because again, the gimmick that this deck has is that reverse synchro-like mechanic. So that's pretty much it for the normal summon we play. Then moving on to another card that we run as a tech choice is 1 copy of Crystal Girl. This card is incredibly potent. Basically, if it's normal or special, you can activate this effect. During the end phase of the turn, it lets you search for a level 5 or higher water monster from the deck to your hand. So like, this is great because it lets you search any Ursarctic bear you want, and since they're quick effects to summon, like, you can easily set yourself up for the following turn, or some interesting play during your opponent's turn, potentially. But what I like most about this card is the fact that if you control a level 5 or higher water monster, you can special summon this card from your graveyard to your side of the field, but banish it when it leaves. So, like, this card is a really good target to pitch off of a card called Ursarctic Departure, which we'll get into once we get into the spells. But this card is pretty much like a free extender that lets you as a rota for the theme, pretty much. So we played as a 1-of. Again, I don't want to like have too many bricks in the deck, and like, I think at 1 is perfectly fine. Like, you pretty much, you see this card and you want to see it, and like, because obviously I would rather summon the lefty driver, righty driver most of the time. So that's why I'm not like maxing out on Crystal Girls, because ultimately righty driver is the card you usually want to be normal summoning most of the time. But then moving on, 1 copy of Hopper Squadron. This is a really cool tech choice because, again, we do summon a lot of high-level monsters, especially during our opponent's turn. I'm thinking of the Minor Bears, for example. A lot of those cards are level 7s. And with Hopper Squadron, we can easily target those bears to then make a level 9 synchro play during the opponent's turn, which I think is really neat. Also, we do have a way to search this, which I'll explain once we get to the extra deck. But moving on, we play triple copies of Effect Veiler in the main deck as our hand trap of choice, and I'll explain why Veiler specifically. It'll make more sense once we get to the spell cards, but number 1, Veiler's not once per turn. which is really important to me. Also, number 2, the fact that you can just normal summon the Veiler if you need to, and it is a level 1 tuner, which you can tune with your level 7 bears to make a level 8 synchro, I think is pretty unique. So that's why we decided to settle on the Veiler specifically. And then again, we'll explain exactly more in detail why Veiler once we get to the spell cards. But moving on, we also main deck triple copies of Godarla, the Mystery Dust Kaiju. Reason why is because this is just another level 7 or higher monster that your bears contribute to put themselves on field. However, if you're going second or need to just get rid of a monster that's causing you trouble, you can easily just kaiju over it. And with the amount of draw power this deck has, it's very easy to draw into this and just get rid of a threat that your opponent may have put out. Or if they don't have a threat or you don't need to kaiju anything, just use it to summon your other bears. So I like the utility that offers in particular. And then we are also on 1 copy of Saravis, the Ancient and Ascended, kind of as a anti-hand trap measure. If any of our bears or any of our monsters would be targeted by any kind of effect, we can discard this from our hand to negate that effect, which I think is cool. So it prevents our opponent from using stuff like Infinite Impermanence or Veiler on us or Chalice, for example, or any kind of targeting effect, really. But also, furthermore, if you don't need it for that effect, it is just another level 7 or higher monster that you contribute from your hand to put another bear on field. So I like the utility that offers. And then for the last 2 monsters in the main deck, we are running 1 copy of Destiny Hero Celestial and 1 copy of Destiny Hero Dasher because, well, spoiler alert, we are playing a DPE package in this deck. And we'll get into why we are once we get to the extra deck. But that rounds out the monster lineup. For this deck, it's pretty monster heavy, which obviously will make sense because obviously the Ursarctic bears need monsters to tribute in order to do anything. So it's actually pretty bad when you have a handful of spells and traps for the most part because you really can't do much with that. So moving on to the spell cards, we played triple copies of Departure. This is pretty much the in-archetype Rhoda. You discard a card to then add 2 Ursarctic monsters from deck to hand. That's it. They can even be ones with the same name. It doesn't even specify, which I think is kind of unique. And then it's got another effect where, except the turn it was sent to grave, if your Ursarctic monster would tribute a monster to activate its effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. So it helps mitigate the cost of making your bears so inherently neggy, which I like. But moving on, we are on a playset of Ursarctic Radiation, the most recent support that they got. And this card is absolutely nuts. You activate this card by placing 7 counters on it. Then each time an Ursarctic monster is special summoned from the hand or the extra deck, you remove a counter to draw 1 card. That is not once per turn. This card is effectively a draw 7. Now the funny thing about this is that the deck really needed this because it does you can play without this, but obviously with Radiation, your plays are just that much better because you're constantly digging deeper into your deck to keep your engine going and you're not going so neg on just playing the game, which is cool. Part of the reason why we play the DPE package is because you can only control 1 Radiation. So once you exhaust all the counters on it, it effectively doesn't do anything. So you kind of have to be able to find a way to clear it so you can activate another one. So that's part of the reason why we play the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer in this list. And then it's got another effect where during the end phase, you can target an Ursarctic card in your graveyard and shuffle it back into the deck. Really nice way to get back some of your other spells. Or your extra deck monsters, since they actually can't be special summoned from grave, since you don't actually synchro summon them. But moving on, 2 copies of Ursarctic Slider, quick play spell. This lets you target an Ursarctic monster that's in your grave or that's banished, and you special summon it. Yes, it can trigger that monster's effects on summon, which is great. However, that monster does get destroyed at the end phase. But you just play 2 of this because it is a hard once per turn, and you don't want to brick on it. And then we are on 1 copy of their field spell, Ursarctic Big Dipper. This field spell is kind of interesting, but we just need to play 1 of it, because it just so happens that one of our main synchros can actually activate this card directly from our deck. And again, we don't really want to clog on this card, so since we can search it, technically, with our extra deck plays, we don't need to max out on this. But basically, if once per turn, if your Ursarctic monster would tribute a monster to activate its effect, you can banish a level 7 or higher Ursarctic monster from your grave instead. So this is another way to help mitigate the cost of summoning your bears, which I think is great. And then not only that, each time a monster is special summoned, regardless if that's your special summon or your opponent's special summon, you put a counter on this card. And then once per turn, if a monster is special summoned and an Ursarctic synchro monster is on the field, you can remove all counters from this card, minimum 7. So you at least need to have 7 counters on this. And then you can target a monster your opponent controls and take control of it. That is a permanent change of heart, and you can even use that monster's effects as if it was your own. So pretty cool effect for the most part, but it's just a 1 of in the deck. And then to round out the spells, well, actually, that's a lie. We still have one more spell card after this. So we play obviously a DPE, so we are on triple copies of Fusion Destiny. Again, we want to get into our DPE line as quickly as we can. And since the deck doesn't lock us from summoning fusions, I just thought it was a great inclusion. So we play triple copies of Fusion Destiny. You just commit to your Ursarctic plays first. And then at the end of your turn, once you've made your board how you want it, you just slap down a Fusion Destiny and bring out a DPE just to help solidify your end board. Now, to round out the spells, is one copy of Called by the Grave. Obviously, every deck should just be playing this as a one of, because why not? And for the last card in the deck, it's actually one trap card, and it is the Ursarctic Quint Charge. Continuous trap. It's got a couple of effects. Really, the one that you're only going to be using the most is the first effect, where you can pay 700 life points to add an Ursarctic monster from your graveyard to your hand. Obviously, you always need monsters in hand to be able to tribute, to summon stuff, so that's a pretty cool effect. It does have another effect that allows you to quick sync on the opponent's turn, potentially, but to be honest, in testing, I seldom use it for that. And then it's got another effect where if your Ursarctic monster is destroyed by battle, you can like force your opponent to like shuffle cards from their hand, graveyard, or field into the deck until they can only control 7 total among all those places. But that is kind of like situational at best, so that really never comes up. But just the one copy of Quint Charge. So that rounds out the main deck, guys. It's 45 cards, so it's a bit chunky. But I mean, to be honest, it's basically a 40 card deck. I mean, it's 45 because you play the Celestial Dasher and the 3 Fusion Destinies. If you cut the DPE line, the deck's an even 40, if you think about it that way. So, but like I said, I mean, it's 45 cards and it's very monster-centric. And again, that's only because you need to have monsters in hand to be able to make your Ursarctic plays. So I felt that was pretty crucial. But now we're going to move on to the extra deck. 2 copies of Ursarctic Polari, the only level 1 synchro in the game, which I think is absolutely badass. He's a level 1 synchro monster, and it cannot be synchro summoned. It must be special summoned from your extra deck by sending 2 monsters you control with a level difference of 1 to the graveyard. So it's pretty, like, you can make this generically. All you need is any tuner and a non-tuners whose levels differ by 1, regardless if that's higher or lower. So again, the righty driver and lefty driver package help do that on their own. Then when this card is special summoned, you can activate an Ursarctic Big Dipper directly from your deck. That's their field spell. So that's why we just play the one of it, because Polari gets us instant access to it. Then the other effect is you contribute a level 7 or higher monster to either add to your hand or special summon one Ursarctic monster from your graveyard. So Polari is definitely needed because he's actually how you access the Ursarctic level 7 synchros, which we'll be getting to shortly. But moving on, 1 copy of Shamisen Samsara Sorrow Cat. That is a tongue twister if I ever heard one. This is actually a new synchro out of Darkwing Blast. It's a level 3 zombie synchro tuner, and the reason why we run this is because we can actually make this with the righty and lefty driver line, and it's pretty cool because this allows us to quick sync during the opponent's turn. So if we end on like a Septentrion, for example, or have a level 7 like minor bear on field, we can quick effect during the main phase and use Sorrow Cat to quick sync with that 7 into a level 10 synchro, which I think is really cool. And then for our level 4s, we play 1 Cupid Pitch and 1 Herald of the Arclight. Now, Cupid Pitch, again, is a way to get into our level 10 synchro line, because you go righty-lefty driver and then make Cupid Pitch a level 3. And then when she's used as synchro material, you can actually search a monster with 600 defense from deck to hand, which will be our copy of Hop Air Squadron, and that's how we actually search it. The Herald, this is a bit of a flex spot, but the reason why we run this is because in the event that like you can't get your Ursarctic plays going with your actual Ursarctics, and all you have to rely on is your righty-lefty driver line, I wanted to be able to have them make something, that didn't rely on you going into Polari if Polari's not going to get you anywhere. Because something that I actually forgot to bring up is lefty driver specifically. When it's special summoned, you have the option to increase its level by 1, making it a level 3 non-tuner. Now that is an optional effect. However, if you elect to do that, then you can synchro into 4s, which is how we make the Cupid Pitch and the Herald. And then Herald is just there as an Omni Negate again. It's a fallback plan in the event that like our plays really got snuffed and all we had was just a righty into lefty. And like obviously like Cupid Pitch Pass isn't going to get us anywhere. So at least we can make an Omni Negate. And then when it does leave the field, we can search for our copy of the Ritual, the Ceravis from deck to hand. But moving on, 1 Septentrion, 1 Grand Chariot, the Ursarctic boss monsters. Septentrion is kind of like a soft, like, floodgate. It effectively, any card that's summoned from the extra deck that does not have a level has its effects negated. So this is what I was talking about. Now that we're going to be entering Kashtira format, Kashtira is mainly an Xyz focused deck. If we got Septentry on the field, it's almost like having a skill drain out. Like none of their cards can do anything, which is pretty hilarious. And then aside from that, if the opponent special summons a monster, we get to add an Ursarctic card from the deck to our hand, which is pretty cool since we can add the major bears and they are disruptions during the opponent's turn. So I think that's pretty unique. And then we'll follow that up with a copy of Grand Chariot. If it's special summoned, we're able to target up to 2 cards on field and destroy them. Note that we can target our own cards, so Grand Chariot is another way that we can pop our own radiation, so we can activate a second copy. And then he also protects us from targeting effects, which I think is pretty cool. But one of the things that I don't want to overlook is how these cards are actually made. So neither of them can be synchro summoned. They must be special summoned from the extra deck by sending 2 monsters you control with a level difference of 7 to the graveyard, a level 8 or higher tuner, and 1 non-tuner synchro. So the way you do that is by using a major bear, since they're level 8 tuners, and then your level 1 non-tuner synchro in the case of Polari, and you like reverse synchro into these things. So the summoning mechanic is pretty cool. But moving on, we're on 1 copy of Cypher Immortal Omega for our level 8 of choice. Overall, a great card. Being able to rip cards out of the opponent's hand and put banished cards back into the graveyard is always really cool. And then for our level 9s, we actually play quite a few of them. 1 copy of Navy Dragon Mech, 1 copy of Stellar Wind Wolfriat, and 1 copy of Ravenous Croca Dragon Archithus. Wow, I probably butchered that. But these cards are, the reason why we run them is because they're actually pretty impactful to make if we make them on the opponent's turn using cards like Hopper Squadron. This thing, when it's special summoned, we can target cards the opponent controls up to the number of tuners in our graveyards and negate their effects. Stellar Windwolf is amazing in this deck. He gains 300 attack each time another monster's effect is activated, and then when his attack reaches 4,000, as a quick effect, he can shuffle himself back into the extra deck and all monsters the opponent controls. Very cool effect. And then the Ravenous Croca Dragon, when it is synchro summoned, you can draw cards equal to the number of non-tuner used as material, and then he allows us to quick effect discard 2 cards to pop a card on field, which is pretty cool. Then for our last level 9 synchro is 1 copy of Trishula, the OG Trish. We can make this super easily using the righty-lefty driver package, which I like a lot. 1 copy of Baron de Fleur for our level 10 synchro of choice. This card can also pop our own copy of Radiation, so we can activate another one, so really cool for that. And then we round things off with the 1 copy of the Trishula Zero Dragon of the Ice Barrier. This is the newer Trish that is really, really insane. And again, the righty-lefty driver line helps us get into it. And then for the last card in the extra deck is the 1 copy of the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer to round things out. And that's going to be it, guys, for the main deck and extra deck. Before we wrap things up here, we'll go through the side deck really quickly. Now, the side deck, I mean, I guess you could argue it's still a bit of a work in progress, but the side I have here is still pretty okay, at least in the testing that I've done. We're on 2 copies of Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, just as another level 7 or higher monster that our bears contribute, but it's a card that if we summon it, it can also mulligan our hand slightly, which is pretty good. So 2 copies of that. Then we're on 1 copy of Radiant, 1 copy of Thunder King, the Lightning Strike Kaiju, and a playset of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. Again, we main deck Kaijus already, so like if we know we're going to go second, siding into this is obviously makes a lot of sense. They're just board breakers, which are pretty cool. The reason why Radiant and Thunder King specifically is because Radiant's a 7 and Thunder King is a 9. So if we summon either of these to our own field, and we have a major bear, it's always going to be a tuner and a non-tuner whose levels differ by 1. So we can still make Polari, which I think is pretty cool. Then for our back row decks, we play triple copies of Galaxy Cyclone just for themality reasons, because the bears are from space, based off the Ursa Major constellation, so I just thought it was funny. And then we play triple copies of Royal Decree, because, again, we only main deck 1 trap card, and if we go up against a very heavy trap deck, we can side into this and pretty much make our opponent cry. And then for the last 2 cards we side deck is 2 copies of the Icebound God. This is pretty much like an infinite impermanence that is permanent. If you have 2 or more water monsters on field, target a face-up monster the opponent controls. That face-up monster cannot attack. Also, its effects are negated. Then, if a level 5 or higher water monster is normal or special summoned to your field while this card's in your grave, you can actually set this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. So I just thought it was a pretty cool tech card that we could side into if we know we're going to be going first, for example, just to have more disruption for our opponent. And then real quick with the Radiation, something that I forgot to bring up during the spell cards, the reason why we choose to main deck Valor specifically is because of Ursarctic radiation. Given that we can draw into so many cards, if we draw into Veilers and it's the opponent's turn, the Veilers are always live pretty much, so that was the last thing I wanted to bring up. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this deck profile and liked some of the choices and explanations that I had for my reasoning behind running some of the cards I have. But with that being said, I will be going to my Photon Hypernova sneak peek this weekend at my locals, trying to scoop up a bunch of stuff so I can continue bringing you guys really amazing content. If you got this far into the video, I know this was a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. I do apologize, but Ursarctic was a deck that I felt needed some explanation for stuff. But if you got this far and you haven't hit that subscribe button, please subscribe. There's no reason not to. Help me get to that 1,000 subscriber benchmark. Like the video and leave a comment down below on what you guys thought. With that being said, this is Nick signing out.